think that there is a problem that if the opposition is going to ultimately bring up an energy that could destroy the world, that maybe just because it's sustainable and just because it's reliable, it's not necessarily enough. That's the stance that the government has. That despite the risk is small, if it could mutate the human generation for the human race for generations, if it could make patches on our Earth, we think that's very problematic. Especially when it is at the cost of developing other green alternative energies. Now, I'm going to do a number of things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to refute to the two arguments that were brought to you by the opposition, move on to extend the two arguments that were brought to you by the government, and then move on to our third argument of how nations lose incentive to further developing real green technology. First of all, about their argument about necessity. They said that we need more energy. Well, we say that's true, but what we don't understand is why that exactly has to be nuclear energy. We understand that it is efficient, but we say that that comes at a great danger. We think that the risk right here, right now, outweigh the consequences. I'm going to further elaborate that on my extension, but furthermore, we think that that also is going to have a problem. While there is a need for nuclear energy, we think that the various factors that you need to develop a nuclear reactor isn't evident all around the world. As they have said, it's more apparent in countries like Canada, a country like Australia, which means that that resource isn't evenly distributed around the world, which means that a lot of other nations, if they don't have access to plutonium, don't have access to developing their own power plant. That's especially problematic because it creates this energy dependence. Fundamentally, the problem that we see with plutonium here. No, thank you. We think that there is a Middle Eastern cartel for oil monopoly. We think that that same scenario could happen if nations start acting on their self-interest in dominating these resources as well. That's why we propose that alternative energy is going to be better. Further, we're going to be elaborated on my third argument. But furthermore, we say that under their second argument, they said something about sustainability, divided into two levels about reliability and efficiency. First of all, it's empirically false that it is reliable. First of all, because nuclear reactors are proven to shut down twice every year. That's the average. We think that's especially problematic if those reactors are the same reactors that are powering Seoul and New York City. If New York City and Seoul shuts down twice every year, we think that's very problematic. Is that reliable? Well, we don't think so. But furthermore, they said, it's reliable in a sense that it could last until 60 years. Well, there's two problems with that. First of all, the longer you have an established nuclear reactor, the more radioactive waste you get. They didn't tell us how we were going to take care of that radioactive waste. But second of all, we also think that what are we going to do? That inherently has a fundamental question we have to answer. What are we going to do after 60 years? What are we going to do with them? Well, we gave you an example of Russia and what they did. They just dumped it in the ocean. What's their policy? Is that what they're going to do? Because under current technology, and we don't see in the near future that we're going to have any technology to renew that resource. We think that that's ultimately going to be waste and that has to be dealt with. We're not going to do it at the sake of destroying our world. Now, let's move on to extend the arguments from the government. First of all, they said our argument about the dangers. We said that there are inherent dangers. Their response, well, there are going to be technological developments. We agree to that there's going to be technological developments, but we say that it's going to be at the cost of human mistakes, that we learn from our mistakes. Which basically means that 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl is a necessary prerequisite to develop a better form of nuclear reactors. We think that's problematic because once we have a continuing factor of those kinds of mistakes, it's going to ultimately lead to cases like Japan. We don't want that. But furthermore, because we believe that it's going to happen on a massive scale, because nations have interest to not share their energy resources with other nations, which means that every nation around the world using their nuclear reactor is going to go having through the same mistakes. We think that's problematic as well. But furthermore, they said, well, it's eco-friendly. Well, no, it's not. Just because it doesn't emit CO2, it doesn't make it green technology. It doesn't make it green. We think this criteria we're using in this place, it's not just about carbon dioxide. It's also about radioactive waste. In this case, we think radioactive waste is actually a lot more detrimental in CO2. Therefore, it's not really green technology. But furthermore, we think that it is inherently harmful from the very time you start mining that resource. No, thank you. The very fact that you mine resources like plutonium in regions also creates a lot of problems because the mining process itself is dirty. There are evidences like in the case of the United States when they try to mine plutonium and then they have like genetically mutated a lot of Native American tribes because they radioactively polluted the water systems. We think that those are going to be the ultimate consequences of getting the plutonium for the nuclear reactors to work in the first place. So we see that it's not necessarily green during the process, after the process, or even when the process itself begins. And then about the risk. They said, well, it's because Chernobyl is because of human mistakes. Well, I've already told you that human mistakes always happen. That's how we learn from them. But they said, well, it's not going to happen again. Well, after Chernobyl, we had 3 Mile Island. We also had Japan. So that empirically proves that there's going to be further mistakes. We think that that mistake, despite that low risk, is detrimental. Furthermore, they said, well, it's not going to be of high financial cost. Well, they failed to acknowledge the maintenance cost. They completely dropped this point. And they also completely dropped the point of the billions of dollars that you need to develop that to a safer degree. And second of all, to actually build the nuclear reactors in the first place. They have to deal with that too. Furthermore, about geopolitical tension. We think that it could also be used as a political tool for other rogue nations to unjustifiably get what they want. We have seen cases of North Korea where they use that as a political token to get their to justify their misdeeds. We don't think that's right. There are also examples of Iran when they exchange redevelop their nuclear plants. So it's not for civilian use, but it's for the development of nuclear bombs. We think that that's also problematic. We think that's currently possible, and that's why it's further going to be a problem because of issues of world security. Now, let's move on to our third argument about how it lowers incentive for green technology. First of all, I want to talk about the allocation of resources. We told you that it takes a lot of money mining it, it takes a lot of money constructing it, it takes a lot of money maintaining it, and then we don't know what we're going to do with the radioactive waste. We think it's going to be ultimately $1 billion industry. We say, why not invest that money on better technology, better green technology that doesn't have that many detriments? We think that ultimately there are other resources that we could really use, like wind energy, like hydropower energy. We don't think that they're inefficient. We only think that they're inefficient because current status quo says they're not as developed. We just need to allocate the resources that we spent on nuclear energy, move it to green technology, and we think that's going to feed up for the inefficiency matter. But furthermore, we think that it's going to get rid of that energy dependence problem. Why? Because every nation is going to have some kind of resources, whether that might be water, whether that might be wind, or whether that might be sunlight. So they wouldn't be dependent on other nations for their energy. But furthermore, if we actually do follow their model and they say it successfully works, we still don't know what we're going to do with that radioactive waste. The problem is the same problem with oil. When we started using oil, we didn't know what the problem with oil was going to be. We think that the same problem is going to happen. We already know that there is going to be problems. We don't have solutions to them. But furthermore, we say that there's going to be further consequences that we are not aware of. Why is this important? Because, well, first of all, plutonium made it to global warming. We don't know what the heck energy, like nuclear energy, is going to amount to. But furthermore, we think that people, because they no longer desperately need this green technology, because they could just rely on this dirty energy, will lose the incentive to develop green technology in the first place. We think that if we're going to develop some sort of technology, it has to be sustainable in the sense that it has to be clean, that it also has to be more reliable than what they propose. That's why you vote government. Thank you.